Hey everybody, this is the fourth here, and in this video I just wanted to make a few final notes about this section of the tutorial. So I've said a few times that you should practice this step, which is leveling, on its own until you are getting decent mixes before moving on to other sections of the tutorial. And I definitely do recommend this, but I wanted to clarify a bit because I think that some people could misunderstand what I mean by this. If you're only setting the levels of your different sounds while you mix, the quality of the mix will depend very much on the sounds you use. If you're not using clean sounds, sounds with a good frequency balance, sounds with nice and contrasting stereo widths, sounds that don't overlap each other too much, and sounds that sound the way you want them to, then the quality of your mix will be limited by this. If your sounds lack some of these characteristics, then you would need to use techniques from other sections of this tutorial in order to give them those characteristics. But since you're focusing on leveling right now, you won't be able to do that, and your mix quality could be limited by those factors. And this is why I made some exercises for this tutorial. There are two types of exercises: ear training and practice mixes. The ear training exercises will help you train your ears so that you'll be more efficient at reference mixing. They will increase your ability to hear certain things in your reference track, such as the levels of certain sounds or frequencies, and be able to replicate them more closely. The practice mixes allow you to practice mixing while focusing on each section of the tutorial independently. So for this section, you have a few completely mixed tracks that only have the levels of each of the stems altered. This way, when you go to mix these tracks using leveling, the quality of the final mix should be very good, because aside from the levels being off, these tracks are completely mixed and won't be affected negatively by the quality of the individual sounds. So, if you are able to, I definitely recommend you get these exercises. They should help you a lot with your mixing abilities and your understanding of the different mixing effects. If you are not able to get the exercises, then I want to explain what I mean when you say you should be getting decent mixes. So, like I said before, the quality of your mixes will be limited by certain things if you're only mixing with leveling. Certain styles of music will be affected by this a lot more than others, and anything where you're doing a lot of your own sound design or using a lot of different sounds is going to be affected much more. So when I say decent mixes, I mean just that, decent. And the criteria that make up a decent mix, for me, are the following. The majority of your sounds are at the right loudness level, and the overall frequency balance of your track is mostly flat. None of your main sounds are too quiet, and none of your background or embellishing sounds are too loud. Your non-percussive instrument sounds should not overpower your drums. You have not done any processing with EQ, so things may be a bit muddy and some sounds may not be heard very clearly. The important sounds should be heard more clearly. You have not used compression, so the dynamic ranges of your sounds may be a bit raw, but they should still sound okay in the mix. Panning and stereo tools or techniques have not been implemented, so there's nothing special about the stereo image. In general, the mix may sound very raw, but still okay on a variety of sound systems. So here's an example of a decent mix. It's a demo song from one of my old dubstep preset packs. I purposefully did not use any mixing effects on the sounds because I wanted to display them as they are fresh out of Citrus. That way people would know exactly what they are getting in this pack without any additional effects needed to achieve the same sound. So you can hear that it sounds alright. It doesn't sound amazing or anything, but the mix is acceptable. It meets my criteria for what a decent mix should be. So basically, when I say that you should be getting decent mixes with this step alone before moving on, what I really mean is I want you to have a good understanding of the leveling process and its importance in mixing, while also being able to hear and replicate the loudness of sounds or frequency ranges pretty closely. And the reason for this is without knowing and understanding leveling as your foundation for mixing, some of the other mixing concepts will either not make sense or not be particularly helpful. So let's say your main synth sound is causing your drums to not come through the mix as clearly as you would like. This is something that could be corrected with EQ and or sidechain compression, as I will explain later in this tutorial. However, this problem could also be caused by your synth sound simply being too loud compared to your drums. And if this is the case, neither EQ nor sidechain compression will be particularly helpful at correcting the issue. You would need your synth sound at the right level first, and then if your drums still don't come through as much as you would like, you can work with EQ or sidechain compression to, get it to sound perfect. But you really need to have that level of the drums and the synth sound right in the first place. Otherwise, the EQ or compression really won't help you. So without this knowledge and understanding of leveling and its importance in mixing, many people end up thinking they have problems in their mixes that need to be fixed with compression or EQ, or maybe even other things, when in reality those problems are primarily caused by the levels of their sounds being off. And I think this happens, people get these thoughts because compression and EQ are focused on so much in mixing. The concept of leveling is kind of assumed, even in beginner tutorials. People think it's really obvious that you need to have your sounds at the right loudness level, so none of their tips or techniques really involve leveling. And leveling usually isn't emphasized in tutorials. It might be mentioned, but only just. In addition to this, people tend to assume that you have your levels set right, and maybe they only assume it subconsciously, but they assume it nonetheless. So if you ask people on a forum or whatever how to fix a certain problem in your mix, they might fail to mention the possibility of your levels being off and give you advice about using EQ and compression to fix your problem, even though it could be possible that your problem is caused by just your levels being set not quite right. So because of all that, I really wanted to emphasize leveling in this tutorial. It is the foundation of mixing, and that's why I recommend you practice leveling until you understand it pretty well before moving on.